Well, I went on regular bombing missions, and I'd take a hand camera with me with a long lens, mostly with 100 feet in it, and sometimes I'd use a Bell and Howell that had 1,000 feet. They're in Stuttgart and Berlin and all the different German cities, and the Americans would send about 300 bombers out every day, and the British would send about 300 Sterlings every night, and it was a constant 24-hour bombing of Germany. My main project was, my main thought was to get the bombs dropping from the plane and landing. Then you could see the puffs of smoke and the fire, and then when it came back, then it was shown on the screen for the commanders. They could tell if they made direct hits. And it was very, very difficult to follow those bombs down because they come down in a big arc, and as the plane goes forward, then it shows where they land, and so you just have to keep going until you see the puffs of smoke, and then you know you got what you wanted. 100% more exciting, and you knew you were doing something for your country, and you knew that you were doing the Air Force a lot of good, so they'd get a lot of publicity out of it. And it was you couldn't get bored in a job like that.
Well, the war was still going on, and so I rejoined the land forces where we covered certain actions. During that, we were told, my cameraman, the two cameramen usually worked in pairs with a driver in a jeep, that there lay in the path of the advancing armies a prison camp, political prisoners, they said, and there was a danger of typhus, so the Germans were anxious for us to take it over from them while their troops remained there, and then under this local arrangement, their men, their soldiers, would then go back to their lines. So we thought this would be a change from dodging shells and bullets. And we drove up to the gates, which were open. They were wooden gates, I remember. They were wired, and there was a crowd of people behind the wire, which was behind the gate. And we drove in and saw a sight that shook us as nothing, even the sights of war, had ever shown us before. It was pain to look at it, pain that this could happen to people. There were hundreds and hundreds of dead bodies piled up. There was a stench of death everywhere. There was pits containing bodies of people as large as lawn tennis courts, containing babies, girls, youths, men, women, old, young, and how deep we didn't know. There was piles of shoes which had been collected and put together. There were piles of watches, and there was the worst picture of those who were still alive. They told us that there were, when we arrived, about 10,000 dead. They told us we were there for about 2 weeks filming all these sites, which no film which I've seen since really conveys the feeling of despair and horror that can be done to people who were Europeans of another faith for no other reason. And I thought as time went by it might leave me. I wanted to forget. But it never does leave you. And there were rescue operation went in. We brought in food and water, and they found, because they were in such a terrible state, physical state, starved to death. I think even the guards suffered, because there were the watchtowers, wooden watchtowers around this camp, which was completely surrounded by a dense pine forest, so there was no hope of anybody escaping. And when I went up to take a shot with my DeVry camera from one of these watchtowers, because the watchtower was covered in shit, so that demonstrated to me that even the guards suffered, because they were kept there beyond the normal time which any guards in any army is expected to. And next door there was a modern military barracks with modern kitchens, with the German troops who were looking after this. The difference between the two was shaking. And the small amount of bully beef which they could eat, the small amount of water which they could drink, they couldn't absorb. Thousands more died. I remember that the German medical staff, their doctors and their nurses, worked with the British medical staff to try to treat the typhus which was rampant throughout the camp. They worked all the hours as if, I thought, these German doctors and nurses, to make up for the terrible, monstrous sights that we saw there. Some of us, one of the man who was with me took still photographs and showed it to the people in the farm where we were staying outside the camp, and they cried. They were refugees from the air bombing, and they didn't know what was going on, they said. And I said, don't show to them. They couldn't help it. And everybody seemed to blame everybody else for it. All the fingers pointed round to everybody else as to who was the guilty person. And they all seemed to come back to the beginning again. After we left Belsen, the war was still going on, and in a way that it was not entirely unwelcome. It drove those scenes of those dead men, women, children and babies out of our minds. But I could not help but think of how such a terrible scene could have happened, even in a war where we thought there were rules of fair play like the Geneva Convention, which in practice no one gave a damn for anyway, as these scenes showed. It needed a modern administration to achieve the thousands of deaths, the thousands of bodies, the people torn from their homes across Europe, railways, so many railway wagons, so many gas chambers, so many troops to guard them, so many other bureaucratic decisions. It needed a modern civil service. And all this, I suddenly realized, could have been prevented by bombing the railway lines, by bombing near the camps, by the mighty religious institutions of the world speaking out against these monstrous crimes which was known to be going on, and no one spoke. No one did anything. And I thought, could this be a contribution to this terrible scenes that we saw? But over and above this, having got into Germany and seeing the number of foreigners, that is non-Germans, prisoners from captured territories by the Germans, working the farms, working the factories, working everywhere. The best of German youth had been sent to foreign fields to fight and to die there, but they still had to have men, even though foreigners, to carry on the work. You've run out.